My name is Caleb, and in this video I want to talk again about the Hebrew Roots movement. I've talked about the Hebrew Roots movement several times in past videos, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception. First of all, I want to tell you why I'm making this video. Number one, there have been numerous people who have taken critical looks at the Hebrew Roots movement. Full disclaimer, I am not part of the Hebrew Roots movement. I do not claim to be part of the Hebrew Roots movement, and I'll show you why in just a second. With that said, I do believe that there has been some very big missteps within the criticism of the Hebrew Roots movement. And the reason why is because there are multiple different theologies and practices that get lumped under this title. So, for instance, you have the Messianic movement, and you also have pronomian Christianity that all get lumped under the title Hebrew Roots movement. Now, I've done a video already on the origins of the Hebrew Roots movement and the origins of the Messianic movement. In my video on the Hebrew Roots movement, I show that in the 80s, when the term Hebrew Roots was first used, it comes actually from three different branches, three different theological mindsets that kind of converge into one and create this movement. And they are Armstrong, that is the Worldwide Church of God, Sacred Name Movement, and the British Israelism, which at the time in the 80s was being called two-house theology. Now, that term has actually changed in the past 30 years to mean something a little bit different. But basically, let's just real quick look at those three kind of movements that converged into one to make the Hebrew Roots movement. Armstrongism, or the Worldwide Church of God, they had all sorts of interesting and kind of heretical views, including the rejection of the Trinity. This is one of the reasons that within the Hebrew Roots movement, one of the things that we see a lot is rejection of the doctrine of the Trinity. Likewise, in the Sacred Name movement, you had people who said, if you don't say the sacred name of God the way that we tell you, or don't pray that with the sacred name of God, he's not hearing your prayers. Also heretical. And then obviously British Israelism was the idea that anyone who actually British Israelism started the belief was that the northern tribes of Israel went north and became Britain, and so the British were actually the lost tribes. This morphed into two-house theology, which basically said anyone anywhere in the world who loves Israel and wants to keep the Torah is actually part of the northern tribes of Israel. So all of these views are actually heretical for multiple reasons. Now, when we talk about the Hebrew Roots movement, I'm not necessarily saying that a person believes all of these or even any of these, but that this is where the movement started. So from the very beginning, we have to understand that there are theological ramifications to the idea, or theological foundations to the Hebrew Roots movement. What got built on top of those was some more interesting theological beliefs, such as a rejection of higher education. And the reason why is because you had people like Michael Rood, you had people like Lou White. Lou White wrote a book called Fossilized Customs, which was just, honestly, it was just a horrible work based on Hislop's Two Babylons, tons of false information. But basically what comes from these kind of theologies is this idea that the church has lied to believers for centuries, and that all that's going to happen if you go to a seminary is you're going to be fed more and more false information. And so from this comes a rejection of higher education as a whole. And because of that, we actually see within the Hebrew Roots movement a lot of errant theologies come in. So after the initial start in the 80s and the early 90s, what we start to see is other theologies like the Et theology, a expansion of the canon theology. So more books like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jasher come in. Rabbinical works taking precedence as divinely inspired. We see Hebrew word pictures and gematria. All of these would fit under the Hebrew Roots umbrella. So if a person might say, hey, I don't reject the Trinity, or, and I don't believe in the sacred name. Okay, that's fine. But if at this point we could start playing like you might be a Hebrew Roots if. The point is that you have all these different theological underpinnings that kind of go along with the Hebrew Roots movement. And so if you're part of the Hebrew Roots movement, usually what will tend to take place is you'll believe in one of these. So So with all of that said, what's the main point here? The main point is that one Torah theology, one law theology, theology that says that the Torah is for Jew and Gentile alike, is not exclusive to the Hebrew roots movement. In fact, you have three main branches of theology and or practice that believe this. They are the Hebrew roots movement, they are the Messianic movement, and they are pronomian Christianity. In my next video, I'll talk about the distinction between all three of those different beliefs and or practices and what that means and how we can distinguish them from each other. All right, I'll see you next time.